Hey, good evening, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to episode 41 of Sword of the Spirit, Sermonator. I mentioned to you last week that tonight we were going to talk about some things that are pretty much everyday occurrences now. Attempted murder, attempted rape, racism, prison, corruption, and the stories that we hear every day are simply the repetition of things that happened even thousands of years ago. The themes are still the same. But as we grew and learned and read earlier chapters of the Bible, Genesis particularly, Exodus and others, Judges, we didn't think of them in terms of how human nature has remained the same, and just that times and circumstances have changed, but that all the skullduggery, the treachery. Remember the Passover plot. Remember how we talked about that. Remember Sukkot and the living water, where Messiah was writing in the dirt, and how they tried to trap him using the law of Moses, but violating the premises of the law of Moses to begin with. The intrigue and the treachery is, I guess, the real word that I want to talk about. And we're going to go through a few chapters. I just want to share together how we see what we see and what the causes are. You may be a little surprised, but it's pretty clear in what Scripture says. In fact, it's very clear. And we have to wrestle with those things. And we have to figure them out and try to understand how they happen and how they happen to these major league biblical figures. Okay? So let's start tonight. And it's going to be kind of just more sharing and one of our fireside chats along with a lot of scripture that I will read. And I hope that I'm trying to read when I read in a way that hopefully brings it to life and to reality. Because we tend to read sometimes, we read words, we read sentences, we read concepts. And, sometimes we catch it, sometimes we don't. But there's just so much. So we take the time to really dig into it and try to present it in a light that gives us a little bit more illumination of what we're looking at. So let's start in chapter 39 of Genesis, first book of the Bible. And we have a situation where Joseph says he was brought down to Egypt and to Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh and his captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of, or from the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. Now we all know who Ishmael is, all right? And when Ishmael was sent away with Hagar, we know where they settled, we know who they are today. And obviously they became also a great nation, as it was promised to Abraham, that his children would, and he would grow to be the father of many nations. And Isaac, whose name means laughter, was the son of promise. And Ishmael, the son of the bondservant. Because remember, Sarah had a barren womb for so long. She bore Isaac probably at the age of 90 or more in our reckoning. But Joseph was one of Jacob's 12 sons, one of the 12 tribes. And it says here that he was sold into slavery by his cousins, Ishmaelites. Ishmael and Isaac were brothers, half-brothers, but nonetheless brothers of the same father, Abraham. And we know the story of what happened. And we know that Jacob was born Isaac, and he had sons. When Jacob was a supplanter, Isaac's son, and his brother Esau sold him his birthright and tried vainly to get it back. In fact, when they buried Isaac, the brothers were like frenemies most of their life. They loved one another, but they hated one another at the same time. Jealousy, whatever. Two very different, distinct people and approaches to life. Esau's, as we know, developed into what we know now as that major religious movement in the Middle East. And Ishmael was his uncle. And so when his father Isaac died, he tried to find a way through his uncle, his father's brother, how he could get his inheritance back by some magic, I don't know, some skullduggery. So what does he do? And what does Ishmael offer up? He says, here, marry my daughter. He marries his first cousin. It didn't help. But these are the kinds of things that went on. So we see here that he was sold. Joseph, whose name means enlarger or increaser of the people, one who brings increase, okay? And he was sold, bought and sold by his own cousins, the Ishmaelites. But listen to what it says, and this happens 3 times in this chapter alone. He says, and the Lord was with Joseph. And he was a prosperous man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian, his employer. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper. Everything he put his hands to, this guy Joseph came out spades. He was a good man. Sold into slavery by his brothers, and then sold and bought again by his cousins. Who does this? Jealousy. But he was thrown in, prisons and all that stuff, and he rose to this position, which was a very, very high position in Pharaoh's court. And it says Joseph found grace in his sight. And this is now, we're talking about Potiphar. Now remember, Pharaoh, Egypt. Egypt means bondage. Mizraim in Hebrew. He found grace in his sight, and he served him. And he made him an overseer over his whole house. So Joseph was like the boss, right? He was like the head capo. And all that he had, he put into his hands. He entrusted everything that he had into Joseph's hands. Now listen. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. You see the connection there. Blessing upon a blessing. When we bless each other instead of curse each other, God steps in and he says, oh yeah? Okay, I'll see you. I'll call your bet and I'll raise you. And he does. It says it right here. Well, let's go on because there's a lot more going on here that we really have to get a handle of. And I think we'll see the importance of it. And it said that the Lord had put a blessing, the Lord was upon all that he had in his house and all in his fields. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. And he knew not aught. He had saved the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. But then, in verse 7, it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. And I'm not talking about telling a lie. You know what I mean. But Joseph, it says, he refused. And he said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. He's entrusted me with this. Okay, there's none greater in his house than I. Well, that was his second mistake. Not the first one was saying no, spurning. But the second was that he was second to his boss. But he said that to this guy's wife. Ooh, I think she got pretty mad. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon him and said, lie with me. But he refused, and he said, no, I can't do this. Found in verse 9, there is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but you. All right? Because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So Joseph understood that it wasn't only a sin at that level, but it was a sin against God for all that God had given him for doing the right thing. His first thought was his boss and God and doing the right thing. And this woman's playing this game. All right. In verse 10, and it came to pass, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or with her or to be with her. And she's working overtime. She's putting full court press on this guy. And he's saying, no, forget about it. I can't do it. Can't do it. It's wrong. It's wrong. And we're all going to die if we do. You know, this is what's in Joseph's head because, listen, when you get these kind of blessings and you turn around and basically spit in God's face, what do? Why do we as a species do that constantly? In verse 11, it says, and it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. That was his first sign that he should have saw. He should have caught that. It was a setup. It was a setup. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and he fled, and he got him out of there. For all we know, he was running naked in the street. She ripped his robe off, but now, look what happens. And it came to pass, in verse 13, that when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and she fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house, and spoke unto them, saying, see, he hath brought in a Hebrew, there's the racism, unto us to mock us. Remember those words, to mock us. She's made the accusation. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried out in a loud voice. How many times have we heard that? Even in the past few years on the news, so-called news. How many times? A racist. He's a Hebrew. He's mocking us. And he's one of them. Furthermore, he tried to take me. And I screamed because I wouldn't let him. He was mocking me. Pretty slick, huh? In verse 15, it says, "And it came to pass that when he heard that I had lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home." See? "And she spoke unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant, which thou hast brought unto us, came in unto me to mock me." In other words, to abuse his power, to abuse the good favor of his boss, as they call him, master, and to make an attempt to take his wife. And it came to me, and it says, and he came with me, but then he fled out. And I lifted up my voice and I cried, and he left the garment with me, and he fled. And it came to pass in verse 19 that when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. And he was there in the prison, but the Lord was with Joseph again, and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So again, he did the right thing. And even in bondage, even in chains, even in prison, okay, under false accusation, God was with him. He made buddies with the guards, the warden, everybody, all right? And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. He was a boss again. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because, number 3, the Lord was with him. And that which he did, the Lord made to prosper. Now, the interesting thing here is that Potiphar didn't really quite believe his wife ultimately, okay? But what I want you to see is everything that went on here. We spoke enough about the racism. We know what that is. It's anti-Semitism that exists in the church today. It's one of the biggest problems in congregations today. I think I've told you ad hoc, a couple times I went to visit some places, and, it comes out. And I did so probably a week or so ago. Just walk in to visit and listen, sit, and you get a guy who's knows a little something. And these are, I believe, good-hearted people, and they want to do the right thing. But there's always a mocking, and there's always we're not interested in that anymore. Oh, we don't need to pay attention to that anymore. In anything that has to do with these old covenant books and the messages that are there. And it's a mocking, and it's an anti-Semitism, whether they know it or not. Some of it's very blatant and open without intent, okay? They really believe that these things are, and others of it is hinted at, but there's always a current running through it. Now remember what I told you, a spirit of anti-Messiah. That's what that is, because if you're anti-Semitic, you're anti-Messiah. There's only one Messiah. He's coming out of that group of people. So that's the spirit of Antichrist, one of them that's in the world. All right. So we see this chapter, and we see all this intrigue back and forth, and we see that 3 times it's stated in 23 verses. And God was with Joseph, because Joseph did the right thing. He didn't suffer in prison other than his own inner self, because he knew that he was innocent. And we're pretty sure Potiphar knew that too. All right. And we say, gee, that stuff kind of went on back then? Well, yeah. Yeah, not only did it go on, people died. I'll be honest with you. On the accusation alone, because of Joseph's status, Potiphar could have with total immunity if he had killed him right on the spot or had him executed. That would have been a penalty for that. So you say there's no words in here that indicate that Potiphar didn't quite believe his wife. Well, that's why. Because if he had, he'd have been dead. Just like that. But the Lord was with him. Imagine that. So you say, okay, well, it's a story like that, and where, we see this back and forth. Well, yeah, let's go back to chapter 37 of Genesis, and let's get a couple more eye-openers and see just how this process plays out. And it said in verse 1 of chapter 37, essentially this chapter is about Joseph's family sinning against him. This is how he got where he went, being sold back and forth into slavery to get him out. They were jealous of him, his brothers, and we all know what he did for them. He saved them all because God was with him. It says Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, the land of Canaan. And there are generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Jacob loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. You've heard the story. There was a Broadway play production back in the 70s. It was a big deal. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and they could not speak peaceably unto him. So now the plot starts. Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. He said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood round about and made obeisance to my sheaf. In other words, I'm going to be kind of in charge of the family one of these days. Get ready. His brethren said to him, Oh, shalt thou reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they didn't like it too much. They didn't like it too much at all. They hated him, it says in verse 8. Yet the more for his dreams and for his words. So they're building up a rage now against this guy, this little brother of theirs. And yet he dreamed another dream, and he told it to them. He said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. Behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. Well, that was pretty much it. He told it to his father and his brethren. His father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that you've dreamed? What is this that you're talking about? What did you do? And they really couldn't believe it. So, the rest of the story, how it goes, and what they did, they basically got rid of him. Then they sold him into slavery. And they told their father that, he was dead, essentially, because they took Joseph's coat and they killed a kid of the goats, and they dipped the coat in the blood, and they sent the coat of many colors back to their father. And they said, This have we found, know now whether it be thy son's coat or not. So they took the coat that he gave them, and they They stuffed it right in their father's face with the brother's blood on it. There was no love here. There was no compassion. It was nothing but hatred, evil, and betrayal. Treachery. It wasn't like, oh, here, Pop, we found this, It wasn't just either, oh, we'll fool him with this. They were sticking it right in his face. They're saying this, in their mind, this is what you get for picking him or choosing him or favoring him over us. That's how we feel about it. All right? They had no foresight to understand at all what the dream really consisted of. All right? They didn't understand at all that it was a future, something that was going to happen in the future that was critical to their survival. So we have yet more tragedy and treachery. Now we go into chapter 38. And I'm telling you, it just doesn't stop. It's a constant theme. And it's like everything we hear on a daily basis, everything we read, news, international affairs, everything that's going on, it comes and it's smacking us right in the face every day. And it's the same stuff. So in chapter 38, it's just after now, Joseph's already, his father, I'll go to the grave. My son, I'll mourn for him. The father wept for him. The Midianites sold him into Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So we're told in 37, in the last verse, 36, that verse 36 of chapter 37, what happened to set it up. And now we look at Joseph's family's sins with the Canaanites, because here's where it gets really goosey. Okay, it came to pass that Judah went down from his brethren and turned to a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her, and he went in unto her. Well, needs no explanation. She conceived, bore a son, called his name She conceived again, bore another son, called his name Onan, and yet again bore a son, called his name Shelah, and he was at Chezib when she bore him. Judah took for a wife for for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. So he wanted his son to marry Tamar. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him, killed him. And Judah said to Onan, go in unto thy brother's wife and marry her and raise up seed to thy brother. We spoke about that. That's how Ruth and Boaz, in the book of Ruth, that's what happened. Okay? And Boaz took up the responsibility as the next family member, because the previous one who was entitled to do this refused. So that's why we got Boaz. And just checking the time. So Judah said to Onan, go and do this. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass that when he went into his brother's wife, he spilled the seed on the ground, lest it should impregnate her, essentially. And this thing which he did displeased the Lord. So, now, if God is not everywhere, how would he have known? All right? Wherefore he slew him too. And the thing which he did really displeased God. In verse 11, he said, then said Judah to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house till Shelah, my son, is grown. For he said, lest peradventure he die also. And his brethren, and Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. And in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and went up into his sheep shearers to Timnath and his friend Hira the Adulamite. And we're going to stop there, take a short break, and we're going to come back and we're going to get into some more intrigue, and you're going to be pretty surprised at what we see. Okay, be back in a minute.